The first stage is classification. That one usually is paired with symbolization. Classification is when exists usually in most cultures, right? Is to distinguish people between us and them. When the process of genocide is enacted, victims are targeted for their national, ethnic, racial, religious identity, and many more, right? There's other classifications such as gender, sexual, political, economic, social identities may make also a target groups. Classification does not necessarily lead to genocide. Again, just because classification exists doesn't mean that a society is in the process, but without it, genocide is impossible, right? This classification has to happen for there to be the full process of genocide. And also another thing that I really like to point out for classification is that classification is definitely part of the process of genocide when classification is used for hatred, right? We classify naturally in society too. A great example I always give is the Dallas Cowboys, right? The Dallas Cowboys are classified as a football team from Dallas, Texas, right? That is their classification. We cannot, let's be honest, none of us can be part of that group, right? For one, many of us are women, and as far as we know so far, to be on that team, to be a Dallas Cowboy, you need to be a man. And then you usually need to be in your 20s and 30s and super muscular and be able to knock over other strong men as well. None of us technically classify as a Dallas Cowboy, right? Now, you also have, you could be a Dallas Cowboys fan, which we could be part of, and you have New York Giants fans, and, you classify yourself, we're the Cowboys, they're the Giants, right? That is for fun and sports, right? Even if you might say some not so nice things about the Giants and Giants fans, you might yell at the TV. Maybe you're a Cowboys fan and you don't like the Patriots or now wherever Tom Brady is, and you yell at Tom Brady about the screen. It is a sport. It is still a classification, right? Because you classify yourself as a fan, but it's not done for hatred or with the intent to hate or destroy another group, right? So again, this is where that intent is really important too, even in this stage of classification. But a lot of when it is part of the process of genocide, that classification is done for hateful purposes, right? And it can come in many forms, cultural forms, many ways is this classification expressed. For example, right here, I put a poster of the Ring der Nibelungen, which is an image from a famous opera from Wagner. And Wagner, through his music, expressed his anti-Semitic, and through his writing, expressed his anti-Semitic beliefs, right? That Jews were this racial enemy taking down. And even in the Ring der Nibelungen, right, the Jews are portrayed as these troll-like evil beings that are there to take on these Aryan Nordic kind of gods and pull them down and destroy them with their greediness and evilness. It is that reinforcing of the classification that Jews are evil, greedy, all the different stereotypes, the classifications that comes with anti-Semitism and how anti-Semites view Jews, and then they believe that Aryanism is supreme and that Jews are a threat to that. It is reinforcing that classification, right? That exist in society. So that classification can come to many different forms with that as well. On the island that we're going to see for Guatemala, that classification is reinforced by Mayans being portrayed as these, continuously being portrayed as these uncivilized warrior-like beings that are brutal and cannibalism and all those things, which happens a lot with native groups, especially in the Americas. that they are portrayed by that very on by colonizers, and it just stays within that nation's culture and society that group is marked as uncivilized, as dangerous, and that classification is continuously there, and then it slowly gets being used for hateful purposes and becomes part of the process of genocide. So this classification stage is very necessary in the process of genocide.
Spanish colonizers of Guatemala believed that they were superior to Mayan Indians. They excluded them from rule. From 1960 to 1996, a civil war raged in Guatemala between the government and communist-inspired rebels. The government labeled Mayan Indians as communist supporters. The army used the war as an excuse to slaughter Mayans. It committed over 626 massacres and murdered more than 200,000 Mayans. Most were civilians, many of them were women and children. And here, always on this panel, it shows one of the lead perpetrators right here. Here we have General Efrain Rios Montt, who during his 7-month tenure as president was really kind of the leading mastermind behind the genocide in Guatemala. From especially between 82 and 83, most of the violence of the Civil War happened, but also the massacres of the Mayan Indians. This is actually a real, they're all really good graphic novels, but this one is really good. It really narrates the impact of the Civil War on the Mayan communities really well. And it explains the different impacts of this genocide being part of Civil War, right? And in a sense, we have to remember several of these genocides are going to be during Civil War. In a sense, Cambodia is, Rwanda is, Bosnia in a way too. So we have several of these that are part of civil wars. And a lot of these genocides are during war in general. But you can see the Mayan population being pulled between the two, and being used, the children being used as child soldiers as well, being removed from their families and being used for that. This graphic novels do always give the warning if you're working with walk-in visitors that there is graphic content in there, including rape scenes. So I do always give you the notice up for that as well. So I am going to grab one of these as well. This is our keys, and remember we have the big one now in the installation as well. So you always have a little cheat sheet. You should have these in Moodle as well. I don't have Moodle in front of me as I'm in the exhibit, so, but you should have these in Moodle as well. Let me know if they're not there. If not, I can load them back up into Moodle. But that allows you to kind of read. So I kind of want to use this key. So if you want to open this in Moodle, Perry, do you want to have one too to hold on to as we go along? What I want to kind of do is go through that and talk about in a sense, give you a little background about the Guatemala genocide. What I am not going to do is narrate the whole history of the Guatemala genocide. I used to do that, and we're never going to end with docent training if we do it that way. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the island, because that's what you will do as docents, is use the island to explain how to explain the Guatemala genocide, right? But if not, you can always point visitors, students, you can read it for students, have a student read it, or point visitors to it. And it has those key things in it, right? The amount, the leading perpetrators, it has a lot of information in here. But again, the point is here, this island is not about the Guatemala genocide, it is about classification. Okay, let's see, where is the best way to start? Let's start on this side right here. And again, I really recommend, it's not the same on the virtual field trip card. Perry will do his best to aim up and down, but you got to come stand here in the exhibit and kind of walk back and forward to see the full impact. It's not even fully the same on the cue card either, in a sense, but and I'm gonna use some light here, but what I want to start again is first in the center here, right? We have the shape of Guatemala. You can see on that map of Guatemala the different provinces of Guatemala. This is actually, I need to see what that is. Oh yeah, it's actually number one on there. It's not always number one, so be careful with that. So this shows the different provinces of Guatemala and where some of the different groups of Mayan populations are. So we have to understand is that these populations, of course, these are the native populations here that are in Guatemala when the Spanish colonizers arrive in Guatemala and conquer Guatemala with that. And at that point, already many of the Mayan population is displaced. Now we have this notion of one Mayan population, right? But in reality, these are different groupings. These are different groups of Mayans, and they see distinctions between themselves, and they don't always label themselves together as one Mayan population. But of course, to the colonizers, to the government, they are going to oftentimes be one entity, very similar to what we do in the United States, right? We look at American Indians, like they're all exactly the same. We don't see them as different nations and tribes frequently. They do, right? They don't go by American Indian, they go by Cherokee and Navajo and Comanche. They don't go with American Indian, but it is a very much, in a sense, an outsider view on this community. So that is the first step that we show in this island, right? Is that these are different groupings of Mayans, and they are going to be a little bit differently impacted. You can see the red dots on there. Some of them are smaller, some of them are bigger, but they show really the density of the massacres that will happen during the Guatemala genocide. So you can see really in those areas, especially that kind of like turquoise, bluish green there. You can see those big dots right there. That's where a lot of those Mayan mountain villages are, and they are going to be particularly targeted. So, so that is a big part of this narrative is first that, when these Spanish colonizers arrive, they are going to be faced with many different groupings and that they're going to remain through Guatemalan history. They're going to now be seen as one, as Mayans, right? Very quickly on, because Mayans are very different from the Spanish colonizers, the colonizers are going to see them as, the conquistadors are going to see them as lesser. They are going to fight them, they're going to battle them, especially, in the beginning, there is some attempt at making peaceful contacts, but that is not going to remain. And especially when these Mayan populations realize that the Spanish conquistadors don't have best intent, here that they are here as conquerors, that they are in a sense here as invaders, and the Mayans will group together and they will fight the conquistadors. So not only are they seen as different, as uncivilized, they're also very quickly are going to be labeled as warrior-like and dangerous. Now that same narrative, we're going to see it again when we get to Texas and when we're going to look at the Karankawas, right? This is actually where we already start seeing that stage, in a sense, set of dehumanization, is that the perpetrator group is now removing those some of those human characteristics and start labeling and dehumanizing the weaker group as enemy-like, as uncivilized, as dangerous, and so that stage, in a sense, of dehumanization comes with that. I'm going to show you in a little bit how that is depicted on the island as well. But at that point, the classification already happens too. And I'm going to actually have Perry follow me to the other side, because we depict that in class, that stage of classification in many different ways on this island here. So very early on, so that stage of classification, right? We talked about that it exists in many societies, right? It becomes part of the process of genocide when it's used with the intent to hate, right? And the intent to remove group from that society. And so here, first of all, we have depictions of the Mayan gods here, which very early on, um, uh, there was no proof of cannibalism within the Mayans, especially by the time the Spanish conquistadors arrived, of cannibalism, of violence among the Mayans. But still, their gods brought fear. Again, paganism was seen something as uncivilized. So the continuous depiction of the gods was very threatening. And that really already set that classification right there, right? Is just the Mayan gods right there, that they are different, they're paganist, they're uncivilized, their gods are warrior-like, so they must be warrior-like as well. So they're very different from us. They're the other, right? And so that classification already starts right there off the bat with Spanish colonization. So that's why Guatemala is a great example here. And we could have used Tasmania for it too, but off the bat is right there. So that is the first depiction on this island right here of the Mayan gods. Oh my God, my eyesight has gotten so bad since COVID. I used to have no problem reading this, and now I'm like, no, I'm good. I need some light. I'll stand over here. So I want to, yeah. So on the thing it says as well, the Mayan gods representing classification of Mayans as uncivilized and dangerous. So you can see them sitting right there. Does everybody? I don't know if you can aim that high at those. They're all the way on top. Can y'all see them?
Yes.
Um, um, now, before I get to the backdrop here, I want to go to what is the end here, number 6. And this is the right here. I'm going to wiggle him just a little bit so you can see him better. Is the depiction of Tekan Unam. He was a Quiche Mayan prince, basically, but he was also a great military leader, and he really united some of the Mayan armies to fight against the colonizers and group together. Of course, they were underpowered again in weaponry and in manpower eventually. Just imagine all of a sudden seeing horses come from boats and everything that comes with it. But still, he actually implemented some very sophisticated military strategy. The Mayans also had other technological advances that the Europeans didn't have, that he used to his advantage, and he was really looked upon. Um, uh, when you see depictions of him more modern day, you get this super muscular, angry, fierce warrior, and that image of Tekun Unum is the image that instills itself in as this is what Mayans are, right? They're this warrior, like they're this dangerous, and Tekun Unum in a sense becomes this face. We don't, he becomes this depiction of this fierce. Um, Paganist, uncivilized warrior, not this military strategist that is out there leading his people. That is not in a sense, how he will be viewed anymore. So that classification really has set in from very early on, and that's going to remain. And that's how Mayans will continuously be depicted. To the point that they themselves start depicting them often frequently as well, that they start adopting some of these classifications as well. But in reality, and this is important, Mayan populations the Mayan population in Guatemala specifically is actually not very warrior-like at all. They are mainly, the vast majority, moving through very much a farming community. So it is important that we depicted that as well, right? Who really truly are the Mayans? While the vast majority live in very poor communities in these mountain towns, farming corn. That is the main substance that they are farming, especially by the time we get to the 1900s, right? And then I'm literally fast forwarding from colonization to the 1900s, right? But at that point, before we even get the turnover or regimes, before we get to World War II, um, uh, these are established poor farmer communities, the vast majority. Some are slowly starting to live in more urban areas, When the communists will come to power, we see even some Mayans become part of politics as well. But the vast majority has nothing to do with politics, is not living in urban areas. They are going to be part of this core. And that's what the corn here is representing, right? See all that corn around the island? A lot of kids will ask about the corn. That's what it is here. It represents the true nature of this community, right? That it is a poor, very peaceful community with that. The other part that is, and then Perry, I don't know if we can show that, is the base here, which is number 9 on here. That is traditional Mayan weaving. So we added that to it, that element of the traditional Mayan weaving, again, because they have this deep culture, this traditions, right, that were seen as very different as other, but those traditions, again, usually very peaceful, um, uh, basket weaving, pattern weaving, as we can see here on the floor. And I'm going to talk a little bit quieter. Let me know if I'm talking too quiet, because our CEO is leading a tour here of the museum as she's coming through. So that weaving pattern is, again, denoting those mountain villages, those communities, that is part of their tradition. Every time on each one of the bases, we wanted to connect it to something, to the victim as well, and highlighting that in there. So you can see that here on the bottom. So this is the situation we're at, right? As we move to the mid 1900s, Guatemala sees an overturn of different regimes. And it's definitely going to be part of this Cold War that we're going to see happen. This Cold War is going to impact a lot of South and Central America. And it's going to be pulled left and right between, literally left and right. Um, no pun intended with that. On the one hand, we're going to have these rightist movements that are going to be very closely tied to the United States come to power. On the other hand, we're going to have a communist regime pop up. Um, um, by the 1930s, come to power and fade back away with the support of the United States. They're going to be overthrown by a rightist regime, and the communists have to flee. Right? They flee to urban areas. They flee to these mountain villages. They go to the dense forest of Guatemala, and guess who's there? The Mayans, right? So automatically the Mayans get linked with the communist rebels. So once this rightist government is in power, the government is going to basically weed out the Mayans in its fight with the communist rebels, even though the Mayans are not even linking up necessarily with the communist rebels, that they are staying separated from them. Again, some of these villages, right, they're poor communities, not very educated. Their big politics, civil war was not part of their um, worldview. That didn't matter, right? Because we've had this classification happen, the stage, again, this is why this is so necessary. Mayans are already labeled as dangerous, enemy-like, warrior-like. Of course, they're warriors, right? They're going to link up with these communist rebels. Um, and that's what we're uh, going to see with that. And so um, as the Civil War is raging, uh, we saw Rios Montt as leading general, but we're going to see actually several leaders in Guatemala regularly come down up on these mountain villages. And so, Perry, let's move back to the other side. Because the kids all want to know, what is that big machine gun doing up there, and is that real? No, it's not real. It's a prop. It is not armed whatsoever. It was originally the real thing, but now it's just can only be used as a prop. So if kids ask, no, just a prop. Um, you cannot pull it down and use it anymore. It is fully disabled. But basically, they come in two forces, right? On the one hand, the army is going to swoop down, and they're going to create some special units for that within the army to remember that stage of organization, right? And we're going to have these kind of helicopter guns this come down, and so that's why they're hanging up so high, because it's like this idea that they're hanging from helicopters, right? And they're coming flying down, swooping down into those mountain villages and literally just mowing down any villagers, any civilians that they can see, going after frequently women and children first, because they're easy targets. They maybe can't escape as fast. So unless you can find a hiding spot, there's really nowhere to go. For those who do find a hiding spot, then the military comes in, the army comes in, the ground army comes in. And basically there you can see the handguns, right? They then swoop into these villages too and go from village to village to village, murdering out the Mayans. So that's why this is up hanging so high. And that's really how the Guatemala genocide is perpetrated in there. Any questions so far? Because we've covered quite a bit as well. And again, I'm going over this very broad. You can, like I said, we could talk for 3 days just on the Guatemala genocide and explain all of that. There's so much more details. Remember in Moodle last week, I showed you where you can read more about the Guatemala genocide. I left some more presentations in there as well and different things. So if you want to read up more, let me know. Also, Genocide Watch has full descriptions. So if you want more details, let me know. But for the purpose of this gallery, that is the main content you need to know, is able to explain what all of those different items are and how they are connected to the Guatemala genocide, and then be able to give the description that is right there. Any questions so far?
Yes, Charlotte, would the explanation for this genocide be similar in the way it was done to the Einsatzgruppen? Or was it done in the same way by the local people, etc.? Did they, convert the people that were there to turn against their own neighbors, etc., and so on?
Yeah, they are definitely going to use some other peasant farming groups as well, but it is mainly here, actually, special units are going to be created for this, not as much the recruiting. So it's mainly going to be the army and these special units that are going to be used for it.
Thanks.
I still have a few more to cover. I got to do my bananas and my coffin still. Yeah. Yeah, get there. So I want to go back to the other side again. I'm gonna say I'm gonna make Perry work for his money, but I'm gonna double, triple what he's getting paid for moving the cart here today. I want to go back here because as Riosmond, as this organization is put in place, what they pair with that is they actually give it, a official name. They call it Operation Sophia, and Operation Sophia is the documenting of this classification, who the Mayans are, where they need to target them. And so Rios and his men, they make these huge lists. They document as they go through who is in these villages and where they need to go to, how they need to target it, where they can find these Mayan populations. And that's what you can see is the documentation behind Operation Sophia, of basically laying out who is who. And we added that in there, right? Is because, again, that stage of classification, that documenting and that continues, like, okay, that person is on this list, that list making is in a sense also part of that stage of classification, right? It doesn't mean because all other stages then happen and we're now really in the middle of this process of genocide that classification has just faded away. So you have two really examples here of, in a sense, three examples of classification, right? You have the Mayan gods, you have Tikkun Unum, and you have Operation Sophia and the documentation there. That the lists that are drawn up basically with that. In a sense, Operation Sophia could have also gone into preparation, the stage of preparation. So one example can actually be examples of multiple stages because that particular action can, again, the stages are overlapping there. Does that make sense to everybody? So that one, what we see as one thing can actually be multiple stages happening. And Operation Sophia is this documenting this image is a great example for that. If you're working with the kids, what I like to use, so if you say you are going from island to island and you are picking Guatemala, by the way, if you notice that you might have some Spanish speaking students in your group, Guatemala is one that they're really interested in. Um, um, because it is a Spanish-speaking country. They don't frequently think of Guatemala as genocide, but even today, a lot of students recently have become more interested in it because there's been a lot of Guatemalan refugees and it's been more in the news. If immigration is more in the news, especially Guatemalan refugees, I see the interest of students going back up into this island again. So it's a great island to pick. So I would use Tecan Unam here. So rather than explain the whole thing, I would just briefly explain using the definition on the template what the Guatemala genocide was, and then just use Tecan Unam. With the students, you don't need to, if you're going from island to island, not have to go into every detail. The reason I'm explaining everything to you is because if you have a walk-in visitor, you do need to be able to explain that, right? They might ask you questions such as, why is there bananas hanging on this? So why the bananas? The bananas are really the American connection in here. The Civil War is really centered around the interest of America in protecting these banana plantations that have been established in Guatemala, and the structure of capitalism that is put in place within her. And communism, especially the communist regime, who was trying to basically take over some of these plantations and these capitalist structure and take them away, was a huge threat in the Cold War to the United States. And so the CIA, the American government, the United Fruit, which was the biggest owner of these banana plantations, definitely helped overthrow the communist regime and support the rightist regime that are going to be the ones committing the genocide. So the US, in a sense, does supply weapons and things that are going to be used in this genocide. And that's what the bananas represent here, right? The bananas, in a sense, represent that Cold War and how outside influences the Soviet Union, who's supporting, of course, the communist rebels and all of this, and the United States, and really who's trapped in the middle of this is the Mayans, right? Who really don't care about either narrative whatsoever, and they're stuck in the middle. I wouldn't go that far with the kids. The kids, it's about there's a civil war going on, there's communists, there's rightists, there's people on both sides, and the Mayans are stuck in the middle with it. But for the grown-ups, you might want to talk about the bananas. You can let them know it's also described in the graphic novels as well. And that United Fruit, that's a name that you should know here. The company that's behind it today, that is Chiquita Banana, will grow out of the United Fruit. So you've probably more heard about Chiquita Banana. Is in a sense is the backbone to this whole narrative of the Guatemala genocide. Okay, Perry, I think we've covered everything, right? We got everything. Oh, the coffins. Yes. As we basically have this force coming, and they're flying, swooping down, shooting down civilians. Basically, these bodies and are buried in these. The bones are basically gathered afterwards, frequently, and buried in these small coffins. So this is very much a symbol, and you're going to see that several times. We're going to see it for Bosnia too. Is the ritual burial after genocide as well that comes with it? Is the remnants that are left over from these communities? They have to do these mass burials. So sometimes from Guatemala, you see these endless images of these mass burials and the excavation of loved ones in these mass graves and bringing them back out. The reason we have these small coffins is, and sometimes the kids think that they're child coffins, is because that's where the remainder of the bones goes in, right? After it is safe to come back into those communities, that the army is not there anymore.